Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the A-Plus Show. I'm Michael Appel.
I'm Alec Hogg.
Alec, why don't you kick things off with a bit of a roundup of the markets?
Yeah, it's the last day. We're on the 30th of June doing this recording, the last day of the first half of the year. The way the markets work is usually in quarters, but this, of course, has been a terrible first half of the year. Michael, the S&P 500 index in the United States is having its worst first half since 1970. 52 years. That's extraordinary, down 20%. It might even get worse than 1970 because if it has a bad night again tonight, the 1970 number was 21%. So it's just about below that one. And by comparison, in the last 50 years, the two other bad years were 2002, where it was 13.8%, and then again in 2008, which was you remember the beginning of the global financial crisis. Then stock markets were down 13%. So if you're invested in stock markets and you're feeling pain, you're not alone. The whole world is feeling pain. Here in South Africa, the stock market's only down 7%. And that confirms what Piet Viljoen has been saying to us, is that South Africa, for unique reasons, not because the economy is any better, but unique reasons, our stock market is actually going to continue to do better, he reckons, than international markets. Bad as it has been for equities, if you were in Bitcoin, you would have lost 60% of your money. And if you were in US bonds, you would have had the worst year ever. Now, bonds are where you only play in millions of dollars. They've lost capital of 11% in the first half of the year. So it has been awful, which I suppose you could read one of two ways. The one way is kick yourself for being invested. You can't really do that because it's hard not to be invested. And you might also say, well, if it's been that bad, surely it's going to be better in future. And I guess that's the way that many people are looking at it. Final wrap-up of the first half of the year. The South African rand is down year on year by 15%. In the first half of the year, not quite as bad. We went from 1580 to 1640, but it's been blowing out in the last couple of days. It's dropped by 40 cents against the US dollar, 40 cents in 2 days. So if you're an exporter, you're going to get a lot more for your money, for your products. If you're an importer, you're paying a lot more. So I'm very pleased that I bought my new Roadcaster this week.
Indeed.
Next week it'll be more expensive.
All right, thanks for that, Alec. Let's just give an inkling of an idea of what's to come on the show. From my side, it's going to be the final Zondo report, some interesting findings in relation to the closure of the Gupta's accounts back in 2016. Some interesting names have cropped up there. Then criminal charges have been laid against the ANC. What's that all about? And the ANC, sorry, there's a theme running through all of this. The ANC is being held responsible for debt amounting to 120 million rand. I'll tell you more about that. What's coming up your side, Alec?
I'm going to go back to interviews that I had this week with Miles van der Molen of Cemair and Gidon Novik of Lyft. And also Gidon is the CEO of the consortium that's buying, or are they, South African Airways, who knows. Just the airline industry is in absolute turmoil in South Africa, but it looks like it finally is getting some kind of maturity. Then I had a fascinating discussion with a gent called Forty Mazzoni. He's a award-winning chef who started his own restaurants. He's got 4 of them. His dad was a chef before him, Giovanni's, you might remember, very, very good restaurants. And Forty and Grace Harding from Ocean Basket graced us with their presence for a vibrant discussion. And then the big business news of the week is Prosus / Naspers unleashing lots of new value for shareholders, up 20% the shares on Monday. They came back a bit on Tuesday, but they were up again 3% yesterday. What that's all about, I'll unpack that hopefully in words of one syllable.
Well, I'm going to need that unpacking. Thanks, Alec. I'll kick us off.
Well, this Zondo Bank story, we do know that there's a lot of funny business going on at the moment with the banks and the Guptas, but you're going back into confirmation. In other words, not recent, but this is real history, and it's not a nice picture.
No, it's not great. So I read through the report in relation to the closure of the Gupta's bank accounts and what Zondo has found there. And there were initial findings, which was a narration of what went on in 2016, and then certain findings and recommendations that the Chief Justice has made in relation to this very sordid part of our history in relation to the financial sector, the Guptas, general criminality, allegations of money laundering, and just how responsible the banks are for what went on in South Africa. So I earlier this week spoke to Dr. Lumkile Mondi. He's from the Wits School of Economics and Finance. He's the former chief economist at the PIC, the IDC. The IDC. And
highly respected anyway.
Indeed. And one of the names that cropped up when I was reading the report, just to place everybody in context, all the banks somewhere around mid-2016 closed the Gupta's accounts. I won't go into too much detail there, but immediately the government, through the ANC, responds by creating this interministerial committee. It's just a task team with a fancy name. It's Mosebenzi Zwane, a Gupta acolyte who sits on there. It's Mildred Oliphant, who's the Labour Minister. And then it's Pravin Gordhan. Now, Pravin Gordhan looks at it and goes, I'm not getting involved there. There's no need for the finance minister to be getting involved with financial institutions. This is outside of my mandate.
But the context, of course, was that he'd been drafted back in to take over finance once again after Nenegate on the 15th of December. So we're talking 2016.
Yes, this is
2015 was Nenegate. So 2016 was where the dark forces had grabbed South Africa.
That's correct.
So Pravin was now had been forced on Zuma, on that administration, by the government, by business rather. So I'm not surprised he didn't want to get involved.
I mean, he went to the extent of going to court to get a declaratory order that he is not supposed to intervene in the affairs of the Guptas and the private customer-client relationship. So one of the names that came up is the ANC was phoning chief executives of banks, the big four in South Africa, and saying, we'd like you to come and see us at Luthuli House. Highly, highly inappropriate. And this is what, when one of the people making the phone calls was none other than Enoch Godongwana, a man all South Africans will know to be our finance minister. I asked Dr. Lumkile Mondi what he made of this, not revelation, it was known at the time, but the fact that the finance minister, who now sits the head of Treasury, was involved in this period.
Absolutely. Many of us, when he got appointed, we did raise alarm about the choice made by President Ramaphosa. We live in an environment of factionalized politics. So in his conduct with the banks in 2016, he was probably acting in his own interest to make Zuma, the president at the time, very, very happy by seeing to be using a shambok and whipping at these four banks to toe the line because the Guptas were putting massive amounts of money through the ANC and its political leaders in office.
So he was to be the quote-unquote shambok that was to put the big four banks, get them to toe the line because of the amount of influence that the Guptas were able to wield over our executive. Shocking story.
What a story. And I guess it also confirms the idea that you need to be creating precedents and laws for bad situations, not for good ones. I think it's a common cause now that our president's powers were created for Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
And then we got Jacob Zuma.
Yes. Lastly, on that point, Zondo recommends that the law be changed, that current legislation around banks be changed, that there is a right to be heard. If you are a person who's a politically exposed person, a so-called PEP, like Dr. Iqbal Survey, like the Guptas, like some other nefarious characters, that you cannot have your account closed, quote unquote, willy-nilly. You have to have Audi Ultram Partem. Your side of the story must be heard by the banks before they make a final decision. He wants that written into law. I got in touch with the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. I asked them for a comment. They said, look, we can't speak to you at the moment. We're trying to wrap our heads around this. All of the regulators are looking at what Zondo said. We'll get back to you later.
So let's just understand that, Mike. If you have, like Iqbal Survey, the banks at the moment are closing his accounts, in future they wouldn't be allowed to do that?
So what Zondo is saying is in relation to the Guptas, but it'll be precedent setting if changes are made. Some of the banks went to the Guptas and said, we're going to give you an opportunity to explain this transaction, explain this transaction, explain that one. If they weren't able to give a sufficient answer, then they said, sorry, this is reputational risk. We're going to get ourselves out of this. We're terminating our relationship. They went and they gave them an opportunity to try and explain some of them. Some of the other banks simply looked at other banks closing their accounts and said, reputational risk for us, done. We're unbanking you. Zondo says, no. You cannot run a business. You cannot be a business or entrepreneur in this country without access to the financial system. You cannot, on a whim, close bank accounts. There needs to be this right to be heard, a right to fairness built into legislation.
How interesting. Again, precedent setting, because why are they closing Iqbal Survey's accounts? Has he also contravened laws, as the Guptas quite clearly did? If not, just on the reputation of doing business with a guy who you might feel is unsavory, is not sufficient cause, it seems. Well, it's interesting. It brings up all kinds of interesting ideas, but we don't see these actions being taken often internationally. So it's a strange situation that we live in South Africa, as we do in the airline industry. Because if you go back just 5 years, the airline industry is completely dominated by South African Airways, which had SAA, of course, SA Airlink. It I think had a stake in there. It had definitely SA Express and Mango. So the dominant player, followed very closely by Comair, which had the British Airways franchise in South Africa, and Kulula.com. And the rest were pretty much rats and mice. Safair was starting to make its way. SA Airlink was run independently. Cemair was there as a very small player, and that was kind of the market. Well, today, SAA has gone pretty much. It's a very small airline now, only 6 planes. The SA Airlink has moved up into position 2, and Safair has become by far the dominant player in the South African airline industry, with Comair going into bankruptcy and Kulula and British Airways no longer in the skies. It's something that I spoke to Cemair's CEO, Miles van der Molen. He started the business 15 years ago, and he said, as you would imagine, there was no way he was ever going to be the 3rd biggest airline in South Africa, but they are. Yeah. They're bigger than SAA today. They move more passengers, but get this, with under half of the staff still at South African Airways, which means the new owners of South African Airways, the Takatso Consortium, have got a job and a half. You've got, first of all, you're overstaffed, clearly.
Say that again, Alec, half?
So Cemair move more passengers.
With half the staff.
With less than half the staff of SAA, after SAA has been trimmed down. Wow. Before it could be sold off. There are deals. The deal's been done with the Takatso Consortium, but the consortium still has conditions. There are conditions precedent, as they say. So there's always a way out. And you've got to wonder, add to that, of course, you have the government, which has got a stake in South African Airways, still a big stake. You've got to wonder whether the guys in the Takatso Consortium are reassessing. I put this to Gedon Novik. Now, Gedon is intimately involved in this whole story. His family, the Novik family, were very involved in Comair. Comair was 75 years old. At one stage, they used to boast about being the only airline in the world that had a uninterrupted record of profits.
Yes.
The Noviks left 10 years ago. Gedon's father had worked there for 50 years. Bidvest, a big corporate, came in, acquired control or a effective control of Comair. They had a disagreement on strategy with the Noviks. The Noviks left. And we know what has happened subsequent to that. They tried all kinds of things at Comair, but now they're gone. And Gedon's thesis was that Comair was in big trouble anyway before COVID came along, and COVID just put the nails in the coffin. So what Gedon has done recently, after COVID, he said there was just too big an opportunity. So they started Lift. And Lift has been a very successful airline, but very conservatively run. as you can imagine, it'll be like the old Cemair. It'll be profitable, and they're going to be here for many years to come. That's the way they're approaching it. But he said they are expanding conservatively. They, at the moment, lift between Johannesburg and Cape Town. Cemair, on the other hand, has dramatically increased their operation to take advantage of the gap in the market, or the vacuum that exists because of South African Airways and Cemair departing. What Gedon and Miles van der Molen both said, though, was that the South African market is becoming more mature. If you get a ticket to Cape Town from Johannesburg at less than 3,000 Rand, know that you are being subsidized by someone else on that plane, because that's what it costs now with the oil price where it is, and the Rand having fallen. It means it's going to get even more expensive. So just expect to pay more for your air flights in future. You're not going to be subsidized, A, by the taxpayers, or B, by bad managers at Cemair. Sure. An interesting story, but one that we now know that at least we've got a sustainable industry that we'll have in this country that can start getting the tourism back again. And perhaps in future, when the oil price comes down, then we'll see ticket prices falling. But in the short term, don't bank on it.
Sure. Okay. This next story, you spoke to Forty Mazzoni, yes. And we'll hear about that next. But his youngest sister, as you said, the surname rings a bell, Natasha Mazzoni. She's the chief whip of the Democratic Alliance. Now, she yesterday went with Cilliers Brink, who's the national spokesperson, to Cape Town Central Police Station to lay criminal charges against the ANC. Now, if this
She's
sounds...
a pistol, this one.
Yes,
that's the stuff I've seen of her. Good person to have in Parliament for us.
So I have here the affidavit that she submitted to the police yesterday. I won't go through it all, but it's basically, I'll just read one paragraph here. And if this sounds familiar, charges being laid against the ANC, it's because it happened in March 2019 when the DA approached Shamila Batoy, the NDPP, and said, you need to investigate the ANC for racketeering, being a criminal enterprise. They heard absolutely nothing back. So this criminal enterprise, these are the charges that have been laid against the ANC in light of the release of Zondo's final report. So this is just, listen to this. This is a pattern of racketeering activities defined as the planned, ongoing, continuous or repeated participation or involvement in any offense of which one of the offenses occurred within 10 years after the commission of such prior offenses referred to in Schedule 1. So they are saying that there's been a pattern of criminality perpetrated by the ANC, by the governing party, over 2 decades, and that the Zondo report confirms it. So here is Cilliers Brink, the national spokesperson for the DA, explaining what they hope to achieve.
We are lodging criminal charges against the African National Congress, which we believe and which the Zondo Commission has confirmed has acted like a criminal enterprise. The ANC is at the heart of state capture in South Africa. We have the evidence procured by the Zondo Commission justifying such an investigation and such a charge. And for the Zondo Commission to have credibility, criminal charges, arrests, and prosecutions must now follow.
Well, you always talk about what Helen Zille says, that she gave the moniker to the ANC of a criminal syndicate. It seems that they wanted to put on the record now and confirmed.
What do you do if you're a member of the ANC today, or if you are in the ANC, and how do you defend something like this? Zondo has come out and said, this is what you are. So it'll be so interesting. But what happens, Mike? They lay the charge. Nothing happened in 2019. If there is no action by the police, and you would imagine that given where the ANC's cadre deployment tentacles go, there's not going to be too many policemen who are going to be trying to attack this one.
Want to risk their jobs, yeah.
So could this be a job for Gerrie Nel and a private prosecution, perhaps?
That is an interview for another day, Alec. Thanks for springing that one on me. But I did an interview with Cilliers Brink, and I asked him, you guys are going with the shotgun approach here. You're trying to get an entire organization with all its members declared a criminal enterprise. We know who the people are. They're named in the report. Why not adopt a more focused approach? That interview will be up tomorrow, so look out for that answer. On to restaurants.
Onto restaurants and 40 Mazzoni. The Mazzoni family, we haven't ever spoken about them, I think, before on BizNews, and now we got the brother and the sister in the same program, same week. He was great fun. I looked him up. He's an award-winning chef. He is the son of a chef, so he went into a business that is the family business. I think Natasha's the one who went into a different business, although when you see 40's posts, I was wondering about that affidavit that
no F-bombs in here. Like.
40, I asked him in our interview, I said, you have rather juicy language when you're on Facebook. Are you just behaving yourself now? And he said, no, very much so. I usually talk differently. But he was telling, I think, a very personal and heartfelt tale about how during COVID, the TERS, or the support from government, which we believed was coming, as well as the, it's very similar to what most countries around the world had done. Government shut down the economy. So the idea was, if you shut down the place, well, at least you have to give people some sustenance. That has never come through for the hospitality industry, or indeed not come through for 40 Mazzoni's 4 restaurants. Yeah. So he said what he had to do, he couldn't just abandon people who'd worked with him virtually his whole career, his whole business career. He had to dip into his bond and cash in his investments and his savings. And he said he's got no more savings for retirement. But he's in a good space, he says, compared with other people who've lost their businesses. So at least he's got his 4 restaurants, they're still going, and they can trade their way back to some kind of semblance of respectability in future. And maybe he'll be able to claw back enough to have a retirement pot. But he said many other people aren't in that case. And he's furious about the government not delivering on its promise, because his staff have all paid unemployment insurance. And so it was like, you put money in for a rainy day, and the rain
for 30 years and you don't get anything out.
The rainy day arrives and there's no umbrella. Also in that interview was Grace Harding, who I discovered for the first time, like 40 Mazzoni, has Italian blood in her. She said, well, this is the reason why we are so vocal about these issues. And she's taken on, as we know here on BizNews, she wrote an open letter.
That's right.
One you wrote about. And she's taken on the landlords. She says one landlord came back to her, and the rest of them absolute stum. And that landlord will talk to her in a couple of weeks' time, but she isn't holding out much hope. Her view was that the landlords should also be taking some of the pain for COVID, not just passing it all on to those who had restaurants which they couldn't open. That's a long way still to go in that story.
No, it was a fantastic interview. I enjoyed hearing, well, it's a tough subject to listen to, but to just get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, or so to say, from these 2 restaurateurs, and 185,000 Rand. I was shocked to hear. That was back pay that Mr. Mazzoni was talking about, that one of his franchisees has got to pay back because during the COVID lockdowns, they got reduced rent. The landlords now want them to pay it back. So on top of all of the normal rentals, 185,000 Rand is lumped on top.
Yeah, it's just, I think it was an ocean basket somewhere in Cape Town. Yeah. But that's not an isolated example. No. Many people in the hospitality industry have been very poorly treated. And the problem with this, Mike, is that when you are a landlord and you treat your tenants badly, just know that karma sucks. Yeah. It's going to come back for you. And at some point in time, you're also going to need them, and they're not going to be there, or they will treat you in the same way. So it's a pity. The landlords internationally, and that was the point that Grace Harding was making, are told by the government, you may not charge during this period of COVID. That's it, finished. In South Africa, with our laissez-faire attitude, the idea of, well, our robots are suggestions rather than red means stop. This is something that's really hurting many people in this society at the moment.
Yeah, I loved her overall message right at the end of that interview, and it was, we must all suffer equally. All right, my last story, Alec, before we move on to a very important story, is Shafiq Salih. He's an attorney who I spoke to this morning, and he's representing a man from Newcastle, your neck of the woods. And his name is Rinash Ramdas. He's the chief executive of a company called Ezulweni. They're in marketing, amongst other things. They printed 30,000 PVC banners for the ANC, who was their client ahead of the May 2019 general elections. So a lot of capital outlay. They have to get a lot of people together. They need to go and erect these posters up all over the country. It's the general election. The ANC wants to get its name out there. They have all these posters. People need to put it up. Somebody needs to make it and put it up and take it down. So it was a cost of about 102 million rand. That was the invoice. And that was not honored by the ANC.
Just say that, 102 million rand.
102 million rand.
Make us these posters, 30,000 of them, put them up, make them beautiful, put Cyril's face all over KZN.
Yeah. Well,
102 million rand.
And then the ANC turned around and said, oh, sorry, the guys who you negotiated with, they weren't allowed to negotiate on the ANC's behalf. Problem is that there is a letter. Now it's confirmed to be a verbal agreement because some guys met with the ANC. There was a verbal agreement, but there was, before the capital outlay, before they committed to the capital outlay, they said, listen, we need something in writing from you to know you're going to honor this. And there was a letter from the Treasurer General of the ANC, Paul Mashatile, and that had the name of Fikile Mbalula, the head of elections, on. So the court yesterday, the South Gauteng High Court, turned around and said, no, I'm sorry, you as the ANC are required to pay 120 million rand because it's 102 million and then 850,000 rand per month since you didn't honor that agreement. Here is attorney Shafiq Salih.
The claim against the ANC is in an amount of 102,465,000 rand. It's for 30,000 PVC banners that were supplied and manufactured together with a framework and installed for the ANC just prior to the May 2019 general elections. As a courtesy, Mike, yesterday we informed the ANC's attorneys that if we were not paid by close of business today, in terms of our instructions, we would proceed to execute a writ against the assets of the ANC, and we also then reserved our rights to proceed with sequestration or liquidation proceedings against the party.
So, Alec, it's pay up or face liquidation proceedings?
Nobody's above the law, even though for a long time they were.
Yeah. Okay, to the last story.
Well, Prosus stroke Naspers is one of the biggest, it is the biggest stock on the JSE still, although they've reduced it from over 20%, it's now around about 10%. That means in every retirement holding, you've owned some of these shares. So this is an important story. They bought into Tencent, which is a Hong Kong internet company, in around the, I think it was in the year 2000. They bought 50% of the company, paid $30 million for it. That $30 million is today turned into $140 billion. So it's the greatest private equity investment of all time, which is nice as it sounds. However, up to now, and certainly for the last 3 or 4 years, Naspers has been trading at a massive discount to the value of its holding in Tencent. So you imagine Tencent's over here worth 100. The Naspers shares were trading just before the announcement on Monday at 40. In other words, a discount of 60% on that value of Tencent, their shares alone, let alone everything else that's in Naspers. You got the rest for free and you got a 60% discount on those shares. This has been bedeviling the Naspers share price, and the Naspers shareholders have been most upset. The managers of Naspers have tried various ideas. None of them have worked. And then on Monday, they got permission from the Tencent people in Hong Kong to be able to sell those $140 billion worth of shares. Not throwing it on the market, but selling them progressively, taking the money from that side and investing it into the Naspers shares to improve the share price and reduce that discount. It's quite simple, really. You think, there's your asset, there's the share price. You buy more of these shares, which is then going to bring you progressively higher to the value of the 10-cent asset. That saw the share price going up by 20% on Monday. It came back a little bit on Tuesday, which often happens. You get the traders getting in early in the day and then leaving. But the share price picked up again later in the week. And the good news for Naspers shareholders, it's still at a discount of about 40%. So in theory, there's a lot of gap, a lot of upside still available. The good news in all of this for Naspers shareholders, while the rest of the market has been tanking and falling over, or indeed on the JSE as well, Naspers has come good at just the right time. Well done to Bob van Dijk, who I have criticized. I mean, we've said on this program, I thought they'd actually blocked me off their press cover list. They'd taken my name off and thrown it away because I wasn't invited to any of the events, but they came back very quickly afterwards and said, no, that was an oversight. Must have gone to your junk mail or something. And indeed, I was on the call on Monday. And did
you spoke to the Dutchman.
I was able to, ask a couple of questions. And he was he's a bit snarky in places, but that's to be expected. I don't think we've been very friendly with them. But now, shareholders must be delighted. It has, whatever the criticism has worked. And they are set fair for the future.
Well, Alec, we are just over our quota once again of 30 minutes, but thank you for remaining in our company. We'll see you again next week.
Cheerio.